United Nations Human Rights Committee has found the Australian government violated the rights of Torres Strait Islanders by failing to adequately address climate change. The groundbreaking decision follows a landmark complaint made by 8 Torres Strait Islanders in 2019. To discuss the implications of the decision, I'm joined by human rights lawyer and principal solicitor of the National Justice Project, Professor George Newhouse. Thank you so much for being here, Professor Newhouse. Take us through the background to this case. What was the basis of this lawsuit?
Well, look, 8 Torres Strait Islanders and their children made a complaint to the United Nations about the impact that climate change was having on their low-lying islands. It affected their food, their crops, their way of life, their cultural practices. And they said that the Australian government was not doing enough to mitigate the issue of climate change. Now, I think this is a big decision. It puts paid to climate change deniers, and it also highlights the impact of 10 years of government inaction.
Yeah, so this is a ruling against the previous government, is that right?
Well, the ruling is against Australia, but I suppose given that the current government's only been in for 100 or so days, you can't really have expected them to take urgent action in relation to the Torres Strait Islanders. So you'd have to say it's inaction over the last decade or so, which is the last government.
You say it's a significant decision. Does this finding from the UNHCR allow for compensation to follow?
Well, they recommend compensation. One of the twists in this is that the Australian government does not have to comply, but that would be a shameful episode in Australia's international history. And what it does do also is it potentially opens up the government to further complaints and further claims.
Okay, so is this the first case of its kind, or are there other examples? Are Torres Strait Islanders using a class action to sue the federal government over the climate crisis?
That's right, Karina. There is currently a legal action, a domestic legal action in the Australian courts. Now, what you've seen today is the United Nations criticising Australia, but there is a case underway in Australia seeking compensation and action from the Australian government for Torres Strait Islanders.
And so when you talk about compensation and that the Australian government should be seen to be doing the right thing and follow the UN ruling that the Torres Strait Islanders should be compensated, what sort of quantum are we talking about?
I mean, let's be clear about one thing. The United Nations has said the Australian government needs to take robust and urgent action. It's not about money, it's about action on climate change. However, they did say for the 8 people involved that they should receive some compensation. The case in Australia is trying to achieve the same thing using domestic law, using tort law. It's a different approach. The United Nations case relied on international law, and we were condemned in the eyes of the United Nations. This case in Australia will take a different course and will go through the courts using the law of negligence.
So who's funding these cases?
I believe that the Grata Fund, which is a not-for-profit organisation, is actually funding the litigation.
And what happens next?
Well,
this broke very late on a Friday night.
It's Friday night and we're all trying to piece together what's happened. But look, I think this is going to open the door for more claims against the Australian government, and I think there's going to be a lot of political pressure both internationally and on the ground here to take urgent and robust action.
And have we heard from the 8 Torres Strait Islanders at all in terms of their response to this finding?
I think it's too early. I've only just found out about it in the last hour or so, and I'm not sure what their position is at this stage.
Okay, Professor George Newhouse, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.